Welcome to my video. Today we are going to be covering a match that was played in the Speed Chess Championship. Now, what is the Speed Chess Championship? It's an event that chess.com puts on every year to where 16 of the world's best players come together, like bracket style, knockout style, and compete against each other ultimately for the chess.com Speed Chess Championship uh, title, essentially. And so if you're familiar with like March Madness or whatever, then it's a pretty similar format, and it boasts some of the best players in the world. Like Magnus is playing, Hikaru, MVL, Aronian, Wesley So, I think, Fabiano Caruana. It's a pretty top heavy field. And today I'm going to be covering the first few games of Magnus Carlsen versus Gukesh. Gukesh is an Indian prodigy. He's like very good. Admittedly, I didn't prepare like much information about him, but a lot of you will probably know who he is. He's very strong and has a lot of potential. And Magnus Carlsen, well, if you're on this video, you need no introduction. So we're going to be covering that. We're going to be covering the first few games because ultimately, I think if Gukesh stands any chance against Magnus, wants to make it remotely competitive, he has to do something early. So we'll see if he gets that done, and we'll probably cover more matches. There are some matches that already happened. I just didn't really get a chance to like cover them, but we're going to be covering Magnus versus Gukesh today, probably Nakamura versus Paravian tomorrow, and then we'll just see, just where that goes. And also, before we get into the chess, just let me know if I should cover do more recaps. I know that's what like the big YouTubers do, but I also do feel like, just like analyzing games of players who are thousands times stronger than me, like it feels a little bit awkward. But let me know if this is like content you like, or if I should just like keep this to like, or leave it to like other, YouTubers, and just like I just cover maybe like lower level games. Just let me know what you think is best. And with that said, I will see you with the chess. All right, guys, this is game one. And so obviously their score is tied 0-0. And this is where I believe Gukesh's problems began, this position. Now, I think, white is slightly better, but I think if you just play move like queen f6 as black, then you're doing okay, because really what you see is it's hard for white to make progress. One line I saw is like, I just looked like on a human basis, how would I try to make progress in this position? And I had the thought, oh, maybe I just double rooks, or not double rooks, but just double rook and queen on the d file and try to put pressure that way. But rook c3 is actually a mistake because of this move, knight f5. And black's rook is hanging, but so is white's. And so if you take the rook and black takes, then suddenly you're actually in trouble if you're white, because there's a threat on e3, but most importantly, there's a checkmate threat on the e1 square. You can check black, but they just move away, and suddenly you're actually just toast here. And so if you try and move like h3 to give the king an escape, this is actually a forced checkmate. After queen e1, king h2, queen g3, and then this move knight e3. And there's no way to stop checkmate. So yeah, that would have been a possibility. After knight f5, also if like queen c2, if you just like move the queen away, I believe the move is rook d1 check. And then after queen takes d1, there's queen c3. And once again, there's similar pressure with the knight and the queen. Knight f5 is instructive, not only because you sort of deflect the queen away from the rook, but also the knight puts pressure on the e3 square. And if and when the queen takes on c3, the queen does as well. And the knight and queen can be a very dangerous combination. So just keep that in mind. So in this position, I think black should wait around with queen f6. Obviously, you don't need to play rook c3, and Magnus probably wouldn't have played it, but that was just a possibility I saw. So black played the move queen d5, which I believe started their problems, because after queen d5, e d5, you simply have an isolated pawn on the d file, and just a few moves later, you won it. Or white won it, excuse me. Knight takes d5 and then rook c4. Now, black could have defended passively with like knight b7, protecting with the rook, but I think white's position is just very easy. You can just activate the king very easily. The rook dominates the c file. the knight's just terrible on b7. So I understand, just sort of sacrificing a pawn with knight c4, and then knight d5, obviously, because the pawn was protecting the knight. So rook takes, and Magnus is up a pawn in the rook ending, which is never a guarantee of a full point, because a lot of rook endgames can be drawn with accurate defense. But I would say Magnus's king is more active. The rook has more potential targets than this rook, as you will see. Magnus was able to convert quite effortlessly, it seemed. So rook d2 and then rook a2. White played f4 and then activated the king that way. I do think f4 is instructive because you want to get the king closer to the center. King activity in the endgame is very important. But if you go king f4 immediately, then black just takes on g2, and then, you just dropped a pawn for nothing. So white played f4 to put the king on the f3 square and have a similar influence on the center without having to give up the g pawn. So I just thought that was pretty cool after h5, h3, and then obviously these players are in a time scramble. Gukesh more than Carlsen. White played the move f4 to go after the pawn, and you can't really protect it with g5 because there's en passant. So king d6, rook takes, and then white played this move rook f4, which I really liked because black is going after this pawn. By playing rook f4, not only do you protect the pawn, but you cut the king off from being able to make any progress. The rook kind of does a nice job at boxing the king away from being able to do anything, and then white just expands, black gives a check, king g3. The pawn endgame would just be winning because you simply have a 4-on-2 on the king side, and then you could even just play, like, I would imagine you have something like g5. Well, g5 gives this up. I didn't quite work this out, but I think, like, even h4 is, like, fine. Yeah, I think you're going to get some position like this, h4, h5, and at some point you'll play, like, f6. So if they take, you push the pawn. So, yeah, obviously a pawn endgame would be winning for black. No, it would be winning for white, my bad. Getting my words mixed up today, but after rook h1, white decided not to go to protect this pawn, but rather go after the other pawns. And then black just resigned here, which seems like an early resignation, but there's just nothing you can do. This pawn is likely going to go, and if the pawn moves, and the g pawn goes, and essentially you're just going to be expanding your majority on that side of the board, not to mention you're also keeping a constant eye on the a7 pawn, and it's just too much. I mean, it would have taken some conversion technique, and I think if you're like under 1600, it's not a gimme. It's not a guaranteed win, but just for players at that level, it is. I did analyze some lines, like if you go king e4, rook takes. Yeah, I mean, if you can get this pawn, it's just like game over because these guys just run up the board. And if black defends passively like rook h7, you have this move f6. Exploiting this pin, and it's just game over. So, yeah, just an endgame masterpiece by Magnus. And we'll move on to actually the third game. The second game, Gukesh actually won, and, skipping that game is not to, like, disrespect him or anything, but I did want to focus this video on Magnus and how he absolutely dominates. So we'll start this one from the opening. Now, I'm not really an opening expert when it comes to, like, the Berlin, but they got some position. I just thought it was interesting because white gave up the center pawn, but ruins black's pawn structure. Like, really ruins it. They're doubled pawns, isolated pawns in the center. It prevents the bishop from being able to get out. So I think it's safe to say that white has some decent compensation for the pawn. And later on, bishop d5. Where else did I want? Right, so this is a moment I really liked because black played bishop a6, and I believe the idea, or I would say the human idea, is to play b5 and just try to, just open the b file, activate the rook, activate the bishop, just like give some life to the position. Magnus just says no. c4. You're not going to play b5. Or, I mean, you can play b5, but I will just win the pawn and have a nice passed pawn of my own. So I really like that. I think c4 is counterintuitive because it puts a pawn on the same color as your bishop, And generally, having your A and C pawns out like that weakens like the B4 square and the surrounding dark squares. But it's not relevant because there's not really like a knight or really any piece that can effectively occupy the B4 square. So yeah, I just really like this technique by Magnus. C4 just shutting out all counterplay. Queen F6, and then Magnus happily gave him 2 sets of double pawns, not to mention isolated pawn, and I think this qualifies as a backward pawn, but I don't know if it needs to be like a complete like open file, because you know white has a b2 pawn, but doesn't matter. Black's pawn structure is miserable, and you know the players kept playing. I mean, you know, just like g3. I guess yeah, it does. The pawn's technically protected, but at any moment black could exchange and then win the pawn, so you do have to defend it. And then yeah, h4, bishop d5, and white played c takes d5. White is not ready to go into a pawn in game. Do remember that black is up a pawn. Now, I don't know if this is... Yeah, this is apparently drawn. Just because, like, the double pawns, like, the extra pawn advantage doesn't really mean anything, but there's not really a way for white to break through. I mean, there might be some ways, but I think black just defends with perfect play. So, you know, white just takes with the c pawn. And there's another hidden reason for taking with the c pawn besides just avoiding a rook trade, which is that after this move f5, white has a deadly plan that black just simply missed. And by the time they realized it, it was too late. Quite simply, white is going to go... Well, okay, if you want to pause the video and try to find white's plan, feel free to do so. I don't have any water or anything, so I'm just going to stare at you awkwardly. All right, if you need more time, feel free to pause the video. Quite simply, white is going to go king d3, king c4, king b5, and go after these pawns. And black, in turn, when they see king d3, you have to go king d8, king c7 in order to defend those pawns. Yes, it's kind of miserable to bring your king back and go back into the defense, but you have to try to hold it together. There's really nothing else you can do. And black did not see that idea. Black played the move rook h6, and then white just marches in. And it might seem at first like, oh, black just got what they wanted. Well, no, the b7 square is very important so that you can't break through. King a6. Let's give it an exclamation point. King a6. Takes away the b7 square, eyes the pawn, which the pawn's protecting this guy. And your next move is going to be rook c4 check, forcing the king out and then taking this pawn. Just like that. I believe that this, right, so right before the blunder, this is all zeros, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it's all zeros pretty much. And then suddenly, black is just dead lost. Well, okay, it takes technique. And again, like if you're at an amateur level, it's not necessarily a gimme, as I said earlier, but resignation, once again. What more to say? And black resigned because after king b8, it is important first to protect this pawn. You're not in a rush to take these pawns because there's nothing that black can do to protect them. So rook c3, and then you're just going to take the pawns. Then you have 2 connected pass pawns. It would take some work and effort, but ultimately your rook is protecting your only real weakness, and then you'll just like push the pawns, and then for Magnus it's going to be very smooth, you know, and even for some higher level players it would be a pretty easy win. But yeah, we're going to go ahead and move on. All right, on to game 3. So the score is 2-1 at this point. So if Gukesh wants to gain any sort of like momentum or anything like that, I do think he needs to get on the scoreboard here. Now, this game was absolutely nuts. You just see like the king's on f2, Magnus's king is on c7, and it's just like, it was just so hard to tell what was going on that I didn't even want to analyze it. I mean, like, I will admit that, like, I am a decent chess player presenting chess on YouTube, but that doesn't mean I know everything that's going on. So I just wanted to, like, cover some of the key moments. In this position, I mean, Magnus, you know, you're up 2-1, so, like, you can just, like, play it safe. I believe the position's equal, but, I mean, who knows what that means in this position. But you could, like, maybe, like, trade bishops. I mean, it allows him to take with checks. I'm not sure that's good, but I think computer said rook g8, which is kind of weird, but you can just kind of do nothing. Magnus was like, no, rook e3. Just give up that exchange. And, you know, I'm not going to go over the intricacies as to, like, you know, how good or bad this position is. The computer liked white after the exchange sack, probably simply because they're just up material, but just notice that now after bishop takes, after this transaction, watch these two bishops. Mark my words, just watch those bishops and how they operate. So black played queen f6, attacking the rook. You don't want to miss that, so white played rook e2 and then rook b3. So now you get the rook into the potential attack as well. White plays queen e4, black played the move queen g5, rook h3, and here Magnus is like, I don't care, we can trade queens. And this will just show you like how this could easily be messed up. So if white were to accept the queen trade, now this is fine, but black has to play the move rook e3. Sorry, white has to play the move rook e3. I promise, guys, I'll get better at not mixing up my colors and, you know, things like that. But white has to play the move rook e3. Obviously, rook g3 just gets taken by the bishop. And if rook h1, then after the move bishop takes c4, bishop c4 would be a nice move, because if you take, this is actually forced mate by black. So feel free to pause the video and work out the mate. All right, if you need some more time, feel free to just pause more. After bishop g3 check, the king is cut off from going up because of the rook. So the king has to go back, and then rook b1 is just mate. So, you know, that just goes to show. I mean, you can trade queens and play like rook e3, but goes to show like how this position can really go wrong. And then black was able to collect this pawn, and yeah, this is like an example where after bishop f4, sorry, I think it was later. Yeah, bishop d3. Like, it's still better. It's still like, yeah, it's still better for white, but you have to find the move knight d2, counterattacking the rook. And, okay, with 7 seconds, that's not very feasible. So white played the move rook takes c5, which actually is a blunder because of this move rook b2. And after king e1, the king is simply just toast. Once again, just note these bishops. Look at how much squares they're controlling versus like white's rooks. Now, maybe the c5 rook isn't that bad objectively, but those bishops are just monsters. And Magnus actually had a forced mate here with rook b1. Once again, just notice these bishops are taking some key squares, so the king has to go to f2, and then this is just mate. I'm going to mention again, look at those bishops. The bishop's controlling g3, this bishop's protecting the rook. It's just like, sheesh, if you can coordinate two bishops, that's just very powerful. I mean, Magnus missed the mate, which we're not going to criticize him. I mean, he's the world champion. Rook e2 check is still completely winning for him, and like, you know, he has seconds. I mean, everyone misses stuff. It's okay. I mean, I've missed like many mate in ones, I'm sure. So, well, this wasn't mate in one, but you know, you would have missed it probably. So after king d1, you know, bishop e3 is a nice touch. And then you're simply threatening rook a1. That's going to be checkmate because of the bishops. And so, yeah, I'd say for this game, it was hard to give instructive commentary because it was just a chaotic game. But, you know, if you have the bishop pair and you can use them together, it's very powerful. And, like, they can be more powerful than a rook. They can be more powerful than two rooks because one bishop controls the dark squares and the other bishop controls the light squares. And if you can get them working together with like a rook or something like that, or sometimes even the two bishops can just carry the position alone, but that's very powerful. And like ultimately, now objectively, where was rook e3? Sorry about that. Objectively, rook e3 might have been a blunder. I mean, computer says that the position's like +2, but practically in a blitz game, I mean, they have 20 seconds left, you know. I think Magnus just saw like the good practical chances he had and just capitalized on it. All right, guys, it's me again. I hope you enjoyed that game analysis. And before we go, I just wanted to show you like the bracket. If you go to chess.com/events, you should be able to go to Speed Chess Championship. It's going to be one of the first things that comes up because it's a chess.com event. So obviously they're going to promote it, and then you can just look at the bracket, look at the games, things like that. And as I mentioned earlier, I didn't get to cover like all the matches because honestly they were just like happening as like things just got busy with me and things like that. But you see like on the top, Hikaru Nakamura beat David Paravian, which as of the recording was actually today. So we're probably going to make a recap about tomorrow. Levon Aronian beat Andraken very close. Ding Liren beat Alexander Grishuk also close. Carlson crushed Gukesh as we looked at. Fabiano beat Arjun Erigaisi. Excuse me. Sorry for the pronunciation. So as you can see, most of these are actually like very close matches, which is I think a little bit unusual for round one. But yeah. And then, so all these matches were decided. So round two is going to be Nakamura versus Aronian, Ding Liren versus Nihal Sarin, Carlson versus Caruana, rematch of the 2018 World Championship. I mean, it's probably just an old saying at this point because they've played many times since then, but that's always still cool. And Wesley So versus Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. And so, yeah, I'm planning on covering all these matches probably. So, with all these good first round matches, I imagine the second round, it's going to be nuts. So, yeah, thank you so much for stopping by my channel. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you for the next one.